The pain in my hip was relentless that evening, a deep ache that spread down my thigh like roots burrowing into soil. I shifted in my chair, the worn velvet one I'd bought at an estate sale decades ago, trying to find relief. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting bars of golden light across the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself back when my joints still cooperated. The air felt thick, humid in that way only coastal springs can be, when the breeze off the water forgets to visit and everything inside turns heavy. I was parched. My throat had that papery feeling I'd learned to recognize after 37 years working emergency medicine, dehydration creeping in, the body's quiet alarm before things get serious. The water pitcher sat on the coffee table, maybe 4 feet away, but it might as well have been across town. My hips screamed at the thought of standing. Rachel was sprawled on my sofa, her feet propped on the armrest, thumbs dancing across her phone screen. The light from it cast a bluish glow on her face. My son David sat beside her, remote in hand, flipping through channels without really watching anything. The television murmured, voices without meaning. I cleared my throat softly. "Rachel, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "the way you'd ask a neighbor for a small kindness, would you mind passing me that water pitcher? My hip's acting up today." The words hung in the air for a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3. But those seconds stretched thin like taffy, becoming something else entirely. Rachel exhaled, a long theatrical sigh that seemed to come from her toes. She lowered her phone with deliberate slowness, as if I'd asked her to move a mountain. When she looked at me, her eyes held something I'd never seen directed at me before. Not annoyance, not frustration, something colder, contempt. "Get it yourself, you miserable old woman," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. "This isn't a nursing home. I'm not your servant." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair, knuckles going white. I looked at David, whom I'd carried through chickenpox and first days of school, whose nightmares I'd chased away, whose father and I had worked ourselves to exhaustion to put through college. He didn't look at me. He studied the carpet as if it held secrets. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That silence was worse than Rachel's venom. It was complicity. It was abandonment. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart breaking. I'd save that melodrama for soap operas, but something harder, a support beam giving way. The structure I'd built my understanding on, the assumption that family meant protection, shifted and groaned. I didn't respond. I placed my hands on the armrests and pushed myself up. My hip protested with a sharp stab of pain that made my vision blur for a second. I steadied myself, breathing through it the way I'd learned during those endless shifts when there was no time for weakness. One foot in front of the other. I walked to the table, each step measured, deliberate. Rachel had already returned to her phone. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. Victory, satisfaction, the pleasure of putting someone in their place. I picked up the pitcher with hands that trembled slightly. I poured the water without spilling a drop, muscle memory from years of steady hands during crises. I drank standing there, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat, but it didn't touch the heat building in my stomach. This was a different kind of thirst, a different kind of fire. "Good night," I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, metallic, like it belonged to someone else. I turned my back on them and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and, for the first time in the 15 years I'd lived in this house, I turned the lock. The click was small but definitive. I'd never locked that door before. I'd always believed in open doors, in being available, in the idea that David might need me in the middle of the night like he had when he was 7 and afraid of storms. But standing there in the semi-darkness, I understood something new and terrible. The person who needed me wasn't there anymore. Maybe he never had been. Not really. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room. The walls were painted a soft sage green, a color I'd chosen carefully when I moved in. My late husband's photograph sat on the nightstand, his smile frozen in time, forever 43, forever healthy, forever unable to see what our son had become. My gaze moved to the closet. On the top shelf behind winter blankets I rarely used in this mild climate, there was a cardboard file box. I stood, ignoring my hip's complaints, and dragged the step stool over. I climbed carefully, reached back and pulled the box down. It was heavier than I remembered. I sat on the bed and opened it. The smell of old paper and dust rose up. Inside were the documents of my life, the proof of my existence beyond being David's mother or Rachel's burden. The deed to this house, crisp and official, with my name alone, Margaret Ann Foster, typed in clear letters. The mortgage, paid off 6 years ago after decades of payments, bank statements, investment records, and a small leather notebook I'd started keeping 3 years ago, when David and Rachel moved in temporarily. I opened the notebook. My handwriting filled the pages, dates, amounts, receipts stapled to the margins. I hadn't started it with any plan. I just needed to track expenses, to understand why my savings seemed to evaporate despite my careful budgeting. June 15th, groceries, $217, mostly organic items I didn't eat. July 30, emergency car repair for David's vehicle, $850. August 22, new living room furniture because Rachel said my old pieces were depressing, $2,300, page after page, month after month. A record of erosion. I'd been a charge nurse in the ER for most of my career. I'd run codes, made split-second decisions about who got care first, held the hands of dying patients, and told families news that shattered their worlds. I knew how to keep my head when everything was falling apart. I knew how to document, how to build a case, how to protect myself. But somehow I'd forgotten to use those skills in my own life. I'd let myself become small, quiet, accommodating. I'd convinced myself I was helping David by giving them a place to stay. I'd told myself that love meant sacrifice, that family meant putting yourself last. The truth in that notebook told a different story. It told the story of a woman being used up, piece by piece. I closed the notebook and placed it on top of the deed. My hands were steady now, the trembling had stopped. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, 1:37 in the morning. The house was silent, everyone else was asleep, comfortable in their beds, in my house, under my roof, in rooms I paid to heat and cool and maintain. I picked up my phone, the one Rachel mocked for being ancient because it was 2 years old, and scrolled through my contacts. I found the name I was looking for, James Whitmore, attorney at law. I'd saved his number 5 years ago when he helped me with estate planning after my husband died. Good man, sharp mind. He'd told me then, Margaret, you ever need anything, day or night, you call. I dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Then a sleep-roughened voice answered. Hello? Mr. Whitmore, I said, my voice clear despite the hour. This is Margaret Foster. I apologize for calling so late. There was a pause, the sound of rustling, a lamp clicking on. Mrs. Foster, are you all right? Is this an emergency? In a way, I said. I'm fine physically. But I need legal help. I need to evict my son and daughter-in-law from my home. Another pause, longer this time. I see, his voice shifted, became more alert. Are you in danger? Do we need to involve the police? No immediate danger, I answered. Just a situation that's become untenable. I have documentation, records. But I need to know my rights, and I need to act quickly. I heard him moving, papers shuffling. All right, yes. Give me a moment, the sound of a pen clicking. Walk me through what's happening, I told him. Not about the water, that felt too small, too petty, even though it wasn't. I told him about the years of financial support, about the promises that temporary had become permanent, about how I'd become invisible in my own home. I kept my voice level, factual, the way I used to give shift reports, just the facts, the timeline, the evidence. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How long have they been living there? 3 years, 2 months? Any written agreement, lease, anything signed? Nothing, just a verbal until we get on our feet. Do they pay rent? No. I've covered everything. Utilities, groceries, maintenance, repairs on David's car, Rachel's credit card bills. I have it all documented. Good, that's very good. I heard him writing. Here's what we're looking at. This is your property, clear title, and they're essentially guests who've overstayed. We'll need to file a formal eviction notice. In this state, that's a 30-day notice for month-to-month occupancy. We can do this. How quickly can we start? I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Mrs. Foster, his voice gentled, this is going to get difficult. This is your son. There will be pushback, emotions, possibly accusations. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the notebook in my lap, at the deed beside it. I thought about Rachel's contempt, David's silence. I thought about who I used to be before I made myself small enough to fit into the corners of their lives. I'm prepared, I said. I've dealt with difficult situations my entire career. This is just one more, all right then. Let's meet tomorrow. 2 o'clock, my office? I'll be there. I hung up and sat in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of the ocean. This town had always felt like freedom to me. I'd chosen it specifically after my husband died, wanted somewhere new to build a different kind of life. The smell of salt air, the cry of gulls, the endless horizon. I'd thought I was building a sanctuary. Instead, I'd built a cage and locked myself inside, but not anymore. I placed the box back on the bed and walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty, quiet. A neighbor's porch light glowed soft yellow. The moon hung low over the water, painting a silver path across the waves. Everything was still, waiting. I thought about tomorrow, about the conversation that would come when I told them, about the anger, the tears, the accusations, about David's face when he realized I was serious, about Rachel's fury when she understood that her free ride was ending. I thought about all of it, let myself feel the weight of what I was about to do. And underneath the dread, underneath the sadness, I felt something else stirring. Something I'd almost forgotten existed. Relief. I returned to bed and lay down, still dressed. Sleep didn't come, but I didn't expect it to. Instead, I lay there and planned. When you've run an ER, you learn to think in protocols, in steps, in contingencies. What's the next move? What could go wrong? What's the backup plan? By the time dawn started to lighten the sky, I had my strategy mapped out. I knew what to say, what not to say. I knew which boundaries to establish immediately and which ones could wait. I knew that kindness without backbone is just surrender, and I was done surrendering. At 6:15, my body woke itself the way it had for decades of early shifts. I got up, unlocked my door, and went to the kitchen. The house was still silent. I made coffee, strong, black, the way I actually liked it. Not the vanilla-flavored nonsense Rachel preferred that I'd been buying. I sat at the small breakfast table, the one pushed against the wall because Rachel had wanted more space for her yoga mat she never used. I drank my coffee and watched the sun rise through the kitchen window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house began to wake around me. I heard the shower running in David and Rachel's room. I heard footsteps, doors closing, the mundane sounds of people starting their day without a clue that everything was about to change. Rachel emerged first, dressed in expensive athleisure wear I'd helped pay for, her hair perfect. She looked at me with mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten I existed. "You're up early," she said, not quite a question. "Old habits," I replied. She opened the refrigerator, scanning contents with a critical eye. "We're out of that Greek yogurt I like." "Are we?" I said mildly. She shot me a look. "Can you pick some up today?" "No," I said simply. Her hand paused on the refrigerator door. "What?" "No," I repeated. "If you want something specific, you'll need to buy it yourself." The air changed. Rachel closed the refrigerator slowly and turned to face me fully. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." David appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up. He looked between us, sensing tension. "What's going on?" "Your mother," Rachel said, her voice tight, "is apparently having some kind of episode." "I'm not having an episode," I said calmly. "I'm establishing boundaries. Effective immediately, I will no longer be purchasing personal items for either of you. If you want Greek yogurt, Rachel, buy it. If you want anything else, handle it yourselves." David's expression shifted to concern. "Mom, what?" "Sit down," I said. "Both of you. We need to talk." They exchanged glances. Rachel's face had gone pale and then flushed red. David looked confused, worried, but they sat. I folded my hands on the table. 3 years ago, you asked if you could stay here temporarily while you got on your feet financially. I said yes because you're my son, David, and I wanted to help. But temporary became permanent. And help became dependence. We've been trying. David started. I held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've supported both of you completely. Housing, utilities, food, car repairs, entertainment, personal expenses. I have records of every dollar. It's substantial." Rachel's jaw tightened. "We didn't ask you to keep track like we're children. No, I agreed. I kept track because I needed to understand where my savings were going, and now I know. So what is this? Rachel demanded. Payback? Revenge? Because I didn't jump to serve you last night? Last night was clarifying, I said. But this is bigger than one moment. This is about respect, about reciprocity, about remembering that this is my home, not a hotel where you get to dictate terms. David leaned forward. Mom, I know we should contribute more. This isn't about money anymore, David. It's about how I'm treated in my own house. I've made myself smaller and smaller to accommodate you both. I've accepted rudeness, dismissiveness, being treated like an inconvenience. That ends today. You're overreacting, Rachel said flatly. I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the calculation in her eyes, the assessment of how much she could push back, how much she could salvage. I have a meeting this afternoon, I said, with my attorney, to discuss next steps. The room went very still. What does that mean? David asked quietly. It means I'm exploring my options for reclaiming my home and my life. Rachel stood abruptly. This is insane. You can't just— I can, I said, and I will. The details will become clear soon enough. For now, understand this, things are changing. How much they change and how quickly depends partly on how the next few weeks go. I stood, picked up my coffee cup and walked to the sink. Behind me, I heard Rachel's sharp breathing, David's confused protests starting. I rinsed my cup carefully, placed it in the drainer, and left the kitchen. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against it. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. I'd done it. I'd started the process. There was no going back now. And I didn't want to go back. For the first time in years, I felt like myself, Margaret Foster, the woman who'd made life and death decisions, who'd commanded respect, who'd built a life through sheer determination. That woman had been buried under layers of accommodation and fear of loneliness, but she was still there, rising to the surface. The morning crawled by. I showered, dressed carefully in slacks and a nice blouse. I went through my documents one more time, organizing them into a folder. At 1:45, I gathered my purse and the folder and headed for the front door. Rachel was in the living room, phone to her ear, voice low and urgent. She looked up as I passed, her eyes following me with something like hatred. David intercepted me at the door. Mom, please, can we talk about this? Not right now, I said gently. I have an appointment? With the lawyer? Yes. His face crumpled slightly. I don't understand why. You will, I said. Soon enough. You'll understand everything. I left him standing there and walked out to my car. The afternoon was bright, warm, the kind of day that makes you remember why people move to coastal towns. I drove through familiar streets, past the hospital where I'd worked for so many years, past the grocery store where I'd bought food for people who didn't appreciate it, past all the landmarks of this life I'd built. James Whitmore's office was in a converted Victorian downtown, all polished wood and leather chairs. His receptionist smiled at me, said he was expecting me, led me back to office. He stood when I entered, a tall man in his 60s, silver-haired, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Foster. Please, sit. I sat. He settled across from me, pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. I've drafted the eviction notice, he said. It's straightforward. 30 days from service of notice. They'll need to vacate the premises completely. He slid the papers across the desk. I read through them carefully. Legal language, formal and cold, reducing years of family drama to simple terms, unlawful detainer, notice to quit possession. What happens if they refuse? I asked. After 30 days, if they haven't left, we file with the court for a formal eviction order. A sheriff will remove them if necessary. But, he paused, it rarely gets that far. The notice is usually enough. I nodded. What else should I do? Protect yourself, he said bluntly. Cut off anything they can claim as a right or necessity. Shared credit cards, your name on any of their bills, access to your accounts. Make it clear the free ride is over. They might claim I'm incompetent, I said. My daughter-in-law already suggested I'm not thinking clearly. His expression hardened slightly. I was hoping you'd bring that up. We need to preempt it. I'd recommend you get a full cognitive evaluation from your doctor, something official that shows you're of sound mind. Also, gather character witnesses, neighbors, friends, former colleagues who can attest to your mental acuity. I can do that? Good. He leaned back. Mrs. Foster, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Once we serve this notice, relationships may not recover. I thought about David's silence last night, about 3 years of slow erasure, about the woman I'd been before I'd made myself disappear. I'm sure, I said. He nodded. Then let's proceed. I'll have process server deliver these tomorrow. Tomorrow, less than 20 to 4 hours, the countdown would begin. I signed the papers he needed, paid his retainer, and stood to leave. At the door I paused. Mr. Whitmore, thank you, for taking me seriously. He smiled sadly. Mrs. Foster, I've seen too many people, especially women your age, get pushed aside and taken advantage of by family. You're doing the right thing. It's hard, but it's right. I drove home slowly, taking the long route along the coast. The ocean spread out endlessly, indifferent and eternal. Waves crashed against rocks, the same rhythm they'd followed for millennia, unconcerned with human drama. When I pulled into my driveway, David's car was gone. Only Rachel's vehicle sat there, a SUV I'd helped make the down payment on. The house looked peaceful from the outside, nothing to suggest the earthquake building beneath its foundation. I went inside. Rachel was in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables. She didn't look up. We need to talk, she said, her voice hard. All right, I said. She put down the knife and faced me. David is upset. Very upset. You're putting him in an impossible position. I'm not putting him anywhere. I'm claiming my space. He's your son. And I'm his mother, not his servant. Not his bank, not his doormat. Her face flushed. This is about last night, isn't it? About the water? I was tired, I snapped. It happens. It's about 3 years of accumulated disrespect, I interrupted. Last night was just the moment I decided to stop accepting it. She crossed her arms. So what, you're throwing us out? I'm requiring you to find your own way. Like adults? We can't afford that right now. Then one of you should have thought about that before treating me like garbage in my own home. The words hung there, blunt and true. Rachel's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, calculation. You're going to regret this, she said finally. Maybe, I agreed, but I already regret the last 3 years. At least this regret will come with my dignity intact. I left her there and went to my room, locking the door again behind me. Through the wall I heard her on the phone, voice rising and falling in outrage, spinning her version of events to whoever would listen. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the house shift and settle around me. Tomorrow the notice would arrive, tomorrow the real battle would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt a small ember of something I'd almost forgotten. Not happiness exactly, not peace, not yet, hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim the life I'd worked so hard to build. The hope that it wasn't too late to remember who I was before I'd let fear of loneliness convince me to accept the unacceptable. Outside my window, the sky deepened to indigo, then black. Stars emerged one by one. The ocean kept its eternal rhythm, and somewhere inside me, in a place I'd locked away for too long, Margaret Foster, the real one, the strong one, finally began to wake up. The process server arrived at 11:42 on a Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock, had been watching it since dawn broke pale and hesitant through my bedroom curtains. Each minute ticked by with the weight of inevitability, heavy as stones dropping into still water. I'd barely slept, maybe 2 hours total, and those were fractured, restless stretches punctuated by jolts of adrenaline. Every time I'd drifted off, I'd snap awake with my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind cycling through the same questions. Was I making a catastrophic mistake? Was I being too harsh, too vindictive? Or was this, finally, the first truly right decision I'd made in years? The night had been endless. I'd lain in the darkness listening to the house settle, to David and Rachel's muffled voices through the walls, to the distant rhythm of waves against the shore. Around 3 in the morning, I'd gotten up and walked through the house by moonlight, touching doorframes and countertops, reacquainting myself with the space I'd built with my own labor and sacrifice. This was mine. I'd earned every square foot through double shifts and aching feet and years of standing between life and death in emergency rooms. No one got to take that from me. Not anymore. The doorbell's chime seemed louder than usual, more official. It cut through the morning quiet like a verdict being read. I was in the kitchen pretending to organize the spice cabinet, anything to keep my hands busy. Rachel was in the living room on her laptop, working on some online course she'd started and abandoned 3 times. David had left early for his part-time contracting job, the one that never seemed to have enough hours. I heard Rachel's footsteps heading toward the door, heard her annoyed sigh. Then voices, hers sharp with confusion, his calm and professional. "I need to speak with David Henderson and Rachel Henderson," the process server said. "He's not here." "What is this about? Are you Rachel Henderson?" A pause. "Yes, I have legal documents for you and your husband. Is there a secondary resident I can notify?" My cue. I walked into the hallway, my spine straight despite my hips' protest. The process server was a young man in his 30s, professional in dark slacks and a polo shirt, holding a manila envelope and a clipboard. "I'm Margaret Foster," I said, "the homeowner." He glanced at his paperwork, nodded. "Ma'am," then back to Rachel. "I need you to sign acknowledging receipt of these documents." Rachel's face had gone pale, then red. "What documents?" "Notice of eviction and termination of residency." He held out the envelope and clipboard. "If you'll sign here, please." The moment stretched. Rachel looked at the envelope like it was a live snake. Then her eyes snapped to me, blazing. "You actually did it," she whispered. "You actually—" "Please sign, ma'am," the process server said patiently. "This is just confirming you received the notice, nothing more. I need to call David." Rachel's hand was shaking as she reached for her phone. "You can do that after you sign. Sir will need to sign separately when he's available." "Call him now if you want," I said quietly. "But you still need to sign." Rachel's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. She snatched the pen and scrawled her signature, the sound of it scratching across paper like an accusation. The process server tore off her copy and handed it to her. "Your husband can sign when he returns. I'll be back this evening." He handed me a copy as well. "Ma'am?" A nod to both of us, and he was gone. The door closed. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Rachel stared at the envelope in her hands, then at me. 30 days, she read aloud, her voice shaking. "You're giving us 30 days. That's what the law requires." "The law?" She let out a harsh laugh. "You're hiding behind the law now? Against your own son?" "I'm using the law to establish what should have been established 3 years ago, that this is my home and your guests who've overstayed—" "Guests?" The word exploded out of her. "We're family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. I snapped at you once. You've been treating me like an inconvenience for 3 years, I interrupted, my voice level. The water was just the first time I decided to stop pretending I didn't notice. Rachel's hands clenched around the envelope. David is going to have to make some decisions, I said. About what kind of man he wants to be, about whether he can stand up for himself or if he'll just keep letting life happen to him. You can't do this. I already did. She stared at me for another long moment, her chest heaving. Then she spun and stalked to the bedroom, slamming the door so hard a picture rattled on the wall. I stood in the hallway, my copy of the eviction notice in my hand, and waited for the feelings to hit. Guilt, maybe, regret, second thoughts. But what I felt instead was a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. The storm was all around me, but in the center I was still. I went back to the kitchen and made myself lunch. A simple sandwich, sliced apple, glass of water. I ate slowly, methodically, while Rachel's muffled phone conversation carried through the walls. I caught fragments. You need to come home right now. I don't care about the job. Your mother has lost her mind. We have 30 days. 40 minutes later, David's truck screeched into the driveway. He burst through the front door, still in his work boots, face flushed and panicked. Mom! He found me in the kitchen, spotted the papers on the table. What is this? Rachel said. She said you're evicting us? I set down my water glass carefully. Yes. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He grabbed the papers, scanning them with wild eyes. 30 days? We have nowhere to go. We can't afford. Mom, please, you have to understand. Sit down, David. I don't want to sit down. Sit down, I repeated, firmer this time. And lower your voice. This is still my house. Something in my tone got through to him. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. I don't understand. What happened? What did we do? What did you do? I echoed. Or what didn't you do? He looked up at me, confusion and hurt warring on his face. You didn't speak up when Rachel called me a useless old woman, I said quietly. You didn't intervene when she started dictating what I could and couldn't do in my own home. You didn't contribute financially, even though you're both capable adults. You didn't treat me with basic respect or gratitude. I didn't know you felt. You didn't ask. The words landed like stones. David's face crumpled. I thought we were helping each other. You seemed happy to have us here. I was happy to help you at first. But then you stopped trying to help yourselves. You got comfortable. And I got smaller and smaller until I was practically invisible. That's not fair. Fair? I felt something sharp in my chest. You want to talk about fair? I worked for 37 years, David. Double shifts, holidays, nights, weekends. I saved every dollar I could. I bought this house with money I earned, standing on my feet for 12-hour stretches, holding people's lives in my hands. This house was supposed to be my reward, my peace. Instead, it became a free hotel for two people who treat me like an inconvenience. I never treated you. You let Rachel treat me that way. You said nothing. That's the same thing. He looked stricken. I didn't realize. Then you weren't paying attention. Rachel appeared in the doorway, eyes red. This is pointless. She's made up her mind. She wants us gone, so fine, we'll go, but don't expect us to come back. Don't expect to be part of our lives after this. Something flickered across David's face, fear maybe at the ultimatum. I saw him trying to navigate between his mother and his wife, trying to find the path that wouldn't cost him either relationship. I saved him the trouble. If that's how it has to be, I said to Rachel, then that's how it'll be. But I won't be threatened or manipulated into backing down. Not anymore. You're choosing pride over family, she spat. No, I said. I'm choosing dignity over being used. There's a difference. Rachel grabbed David's arm. Come on, let's go figure this out somewhere else. Somewhere without her. David stood slowly, looking torn. Mom, we need to talk more about this. Please, we can talk, I agreed. But the notice stands. 30 days, David, that's non-negotiable. They left. I heard the truck start, listened to it pull away. The house fell silent again. I should have felt something, loneliness, fear, guilt. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. The next few days were tense and strange. David and Rachel came and went at odd hours, clearly avoiding me. When we did cross paths, Rachel glared and David looked away. They had hushed conversations behind closed doors. I heard Rachel crying one night, loud and theatrical, designed to be heard. I heard David on the phone with friends, voice low and embarrassed, asking about couch surfing options. I went about my business. I called my doctor and scheduled a cognitive evaluation, James Whitmore's suggestion. I reached out to former colleagues from the hospital, to neighbors I'd known for years, laying groundwork for character witnesses if it came to that. I started changing passwords, reviewing my accounts, methodically cutting off access to anything they might claim was theirs. On the 4th day, David knocked on my bedroom door. Mom, can we talk? Just you and me? I opened the door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept. Come in. He sat on the edge of my bed, shoulders slumped. For a moment he looked like the little boy he'd been, lost and needing guidance. But he wasn't a little boy anymore. He was a 41-year-old man who'd been living off his mother's goodwill for 3 years. I've been thinking, he started, about what you said, about me not standing up, not contributing. You're right, I should have done better. I waited. Rachel and I have been struggling, money's been tight, and I guess I took the easy path, let you handle things, didn't think about what it was costing you. He looked up at me. I'm sorry, Mom, really sorry. I appreciate that, David. So can we work something out? Maybe we could pay rent, help with utilities, have a real agreement? I sat in my reading chair, studied my son's hopeful face. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to pull him back and pretend the last week hadn't happened. But I knew better. No, I said gently. His face fell. Why not, if we're contributing? Because it's not about the money anymore. It's about patterns, about respect, about me reclaiming my space in my life. But we could change. Could you? I asked. Really? Or would things just go back to the way they were after a few months of good behavior? He couldn't answer. We both knew the truth. I love you, David, I said. You're my son and that will never change. But I can't keep sacrificing myself. I can't keep making myself small so you can stay comfortable. Where are we supposed to go? That's for you to figure out. You're an adult. You're capable. You've just gotten used to someone else solving your problems. He stood, paced to the window. Rachel says you're being cruel, that you're punishing us. What do you say? Long silence. Then quietly I say I should have noticed sooner what we were doing to you. Yes, I agreed. You should have. I talked to a friend about renting his basement apartment, he said. It's small, and it's expensive, but it's something. We're looking at other options, too. That's good. That's what you need to be doing. He turned back to me. Will you really not see us? After we leave? My throat tightened. I didn't say that. Rachel said that, and you'll need to make your own choices about it. But David, if you want a relationship with me going forward, it needs to be different. It needs to be based on mutual respect, not need. I can do that, he said. I want to do that. Then we'll see. He left looking thoughtful, defeated, but maybe, a little more awake than he'd been in years. The following week brought more changes. I had the locks rekeyed. A locksmith came while David and Rachel were out. I kept a key for David, placed it in an envelope with a note, use this only if there's an emergency. Otherwise, call first. I canceled the premium cable package Rachel loved. I changed the Wi-Fi password and didn't share it. I stopped buying the expensive groceries they preferred. When Rachel complained that there was nothing to eat, I calmly suggested she might want to go shopping. Each small reclamation felt like breathing room. Like inches of space returning to me. Rachel fought back the only way she knew how, by trying to make me the villain in her story. She called her family, told them I was unstable. She posted vague social media messages about elder abuse and heartless relatives. She tried to turn David's friends against me. I didn't engage. I'd learned in the ER that you can't argue with someone in crisis. You just hold your ground and wait for the crisis to pass. The cognitive evaluation came back perfect. My doctor, who'd known me for 15 years, wrote a letter stating I was sharp as ever, possibly the most cognitively intact 74-year-old I treat. I filed it with James Whitmore, along with character statements from 3 former colleagues, 2 neighbors and my pastor. Rachel tried one last manipulation on day 23. She came to me with tears streaming down her face, looking vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Margaret, she said. Not Miss Emily or Mrs. Foster, but my first name, intimate and pleading. I know I've been difficult. I know I've said and done things I shouldn't have. I'm asking you, please, for David's sake, give us another chance. We can make this work. I looked at her and saw the calculation even through the tears. This was a performance, designed to push the exact buttons a mother would have. And it almost worked. Almost. Rachel, I said quietly, I don't believe you. I think you're scared and desperate, and you're trying anything that might work. But I don't believe you've changed, and I don't believe you will. Her face transformed instantly, tears drying up, expression hardening. You're going to regret this, she hissed. David is going to choose me, and you're going to die alone in this house. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather die alone with my dignity than live surrounded by people who treat me like garbage, she stormed out. I heard her ranting to David, heard him trying to calm her down. But his voice was different now, tired, less eager to placate. On day 28, they started packing in earnest. Boxes appeared, stacked in the living room. Rachel packed with angry efficiency, throwing things into boxes without care. David packed slowly, carefully, like each item was a memory he was saying goodbye to. I stayed out of their way mostly. But sometimes I'd walk through and see my house slowly revealing itself again, walls without their clutter, spaces opening up. The marks on the floor where their furniture had been looked like scars beginning to heal. On the morning of day 30, a moving truck arrived. It was small, they didn't have that much really, just what they'd accumulated during 3 years of living rent-free. David loaded boxes while Rachel supervised, giving orders in a tight, controlled voice. I watched from the kitchen window, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the final severing. Whatever came next would be different, smaller maybe, or more distant, but different. When the truck was loaded, David came to find me. He stood in the kitchen doorway, keys in hand. I guess this is it. For now, I said. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, for not seeing, for not standing up, for letting it get this bad. I know. Can I call you, after we're settled? I'd like that. He stepped forward like he might hug me, then hesitated. The gesture hung between us, awkward and sad. Finally, he just nodded and turned to go. Rachel appeared behind him, face set in stone. I hope you're happy, she said. You got what you wanted, your precious house all to yourself. I got my peace back, I corrected. That's what I wanted. She opened her mouth to say something else, something cutting probably. But David touched her arm. Come on, let's go. I walked to the front door, watched them climb into the truck. David behind the wheel, Rachel beside him with her arms crossed and jaw tight. The engine started. The truck pulled away. I stood in the doorway until it disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. The house was completely silent. No television murmuring, no footsteps overhead, no tension crackling through the walls, just silence, pure and complete. I walked through the room slowly, relearning the space. The living room looked bigger without their furniture. The kitchen felt brighter without Rachel's disapproving presence. My bedroom, my sanctuary, felt like it could breathe again. In the quiet, I noticed things I'd stopped seeing, the way afternoon light fell through the western windows, the sound of wind chimes from the neighbor's yard, the distant call of seabirds. My house, my space, my life. I sat in my reading chair, the one I'd bought years ago, the one that had always been mine, and let the silence wash over me. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like possibility, like freedom, like coming home to myself after a long, exhausting journey through foreign territory. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The hard part was over. Now came the next part, figuring out who Margaret Foster was when she wasn't busy being useful to people who didn't appreciate her. Figuring out what I wanted, what brought me joy, what I'd been missing while I made myself small. The house settled around me with small creaks and sighs. Outside, the world continued. Inside, in the quiet, I began to remember what peace felt like, and it felt like the beginning of something I'd almost forgotten was possible. It felt like hope. The weeks that followed developed their own strange rhythm, a dance of avoidance and tension, of loaded silences and carefully chosen words. David and Rachel came and went like ghosts, timing their departures and arrivals to minimize contact with me. When we did cross paths in the kitchen or hallway, the air would thicken with everything unsaid. Rachel's glares were sharp enough to draw blood. David's eyes would slide away from mine, unable to hold contact for more than a second or two. I heard them behind closed doors, their voices rising and falling in urgent conferences. I caught fragments. She's actually serious about this. Where are we supposed to go? Your mother has completely lost it. Sometimes Rachel cried. Loud, performative sobs clearly designed to be heard through the walls, to make me feel guilty, to manipulate me into backing down. I'd learned in my nursing career to recognize manufactured distress versus genuine suffering. This was theater, pure and simple. David called friends at all hours. I'd hear his voice through the walls, embarrassed and halting. So, this is weird, but do you know anyone with a room to rent? Yeah, my mom and I are having some issues. Long story. Yeah, I know it sounds bad at my age. The shame in his voice was palpable, but I steeled myself against it. He needed to feel this, needed to sit with the consequences of his choices. That was the only way growth happened. I went about my business with deliberate calm, moving through my days with the kind of focused determination I developed during crisis situations at the hospital. When chaos erupted around you, multiple traumas coming in, systems failing, families screaming, you learn to find your center, to move from one task to the next with methodical precision. That skill served me well now. I called my doctor's office and scheduled a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 15 years. She knew me well. When her receptionist asked about the reason for the appointment, I was honest. I need documentation that I'm mentally competent. There may be legal challenges ahead. The receptionist paused. I see. Dr. Martinez will want to talk with you about that. Is everything okay? Everything is going to be okay, I said. That's why I need this done. I reached out to former colleagues from the hospital, people I'd worked alongside for decades, people who knew my capabilities and character. I called nurse manager Thompson, who'd supervised me for my last 10 years before retirement. I called Dr. Rashid, the ER physician I'd worked codes with, the one who'd once told me I was the calmest person in a crisis he'd ever seen. I called Lynn from radiology, Frank from pharmacy, Cheryl who'd been my fellow charge nurse. To each I explained what was happening. I may need character witnesses. I've evicted my son and daughter-in-law, and there's a possibility they'll try to claim I'm not mentally competent to make decisions. Without exception, every person I called responded with immediate support. Some shared their own stories of family members who'd taken advantage. Some expressed relief that I'd finally taken action. Apparently, my situation had been more visible to others than I'd realized. "Margaret," Lynn said firmly, "you're one of the most together people I know. Anyone who tries to claim otherwise is going to get a serious reality check from me." Their solidarity wrapped around me like armor. I wasn't alone. I'd never been alone. I'd just been so focused on not burdening anyone that I'd isolated myself from the very people who would have supported me. On the fourth day after the notice was served, David knocked on my bedroom door. I'd been reading, or trying to read, mostly staring at the same page while my mind wandered through possibilities and fears. His knock was tentative, apologetic. "Mom, can we talk, just you and me?" I opened the door. He looked terrible, exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in days. His hair stuck up at odd angles, his clothes were rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For a moment he looked exactly like the little boy he'd been at 8 years old, lost and needing guidance. But he wasn't 8, he was 41, and that distinction mattered. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He sat on the edge of my bed where he used to sit as a teenager when he needed to talk about something serious. His shoulders were slumped forward, head bowed like a penitent. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I waited. I'd learned patience from 40 years of nursing. Sometimes people needed silence to find their words. "I've been thinking," he started finally, his voice rough. "About what you said. About me not standing up, not contributing, taking the easy path. You're right, Mom. About all of it." I settled into my reading chair, giving him space to continue. "Rachel and I have been struggling for a long time. Money's been tight, tighter than I admitted to you, and I guess I just—" He paused, searching for words. "I took the easy route, let you handle things, didn't think about what it was costing you, didn't want to think about it, maybe, because then I'd have to face how badly I was failing." Failing at what? At being an adult, at taking care of my wife, at being independent, at being the kind of man Dad was. His voice cracked on that last part. The mention of his father caught me off guard. We didn't talk about Tom often. His death 15 years ago had left a hole we'd both learned to navigate around rather than through. "Your father wasn't perfect, David." "No, but he was responsible. He took care of his family. He didn't live off his elderly mother. Your father also had support. He had me. He had a different economy, different pressures. You can't compare." "I'm not comparing. I'm just saying I should have done better. I should have seen what was happening to you, should have noticed you getting smaller and quieter, should have stood up when Rachel—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "When Rachel treated you like you were nothing. Why didn't you?" The question hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. David's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. "Because it was easier not to. Because if I called her out, she'd turn on me. Because I was scared of losing her. Because I'm weak." The last word came out bitter. "I'm a weak man, Mom. I know that now. You're not weak. You're scared. There's a difference, is there? Weakness is knowing what's right and not caring. Fear is knowing what's right and being too afraid to act. One is character, the other is just human." He looked up at me then, eyes red-rimmed. "How did you get so brave? When did you decide to stop being afraid?" I thought about that. About lying in bed at 1:30 in the morning with my heart pounding. About dialing James Whitmore's number with shaking hands. About opening the door to the process server knowing everything was about to change. "I didn't stop being afraid," I said. "I just decided my dignity was worth more than my fear." "That's not bravery, David. It's survival. Can we work something out?" he asked, hope creeping into his voice. "Maybe we could pay rent now, help with utilities, have a real agreement? We could make it official, do it right this time." Part of me, the mother part that never fully shuts off, wanted desperately to say yes, to pull him back, to fix things, to make his path easier. But I'd learned something crucial in the past weeks. You can't save someone who doesn't want to do the work of saving themselves. And more importantly, you shouldn't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. No, I said gently but firmly. His face fell like a child denied something precious. Why not? If we're contributing, if we're doing it right. Because it's not about the money, David. It never was, really. It's about patterns, about respect, about me reclaiming my space and my life, about you learning to stand on your own feet instead of leaning on mine. But we could change. Could you? Really? Or would things just gradually slide back to how they were after a few months of good behavior? Would you start forgetting rent payments? Would Rachel start dictating terms again? Would I find myself making excuses and accommodations until I was right back where I started? He couldn't answer. We both knew the truth. Change that comes from external pressure rarely lasts. Real change comes from internal necessity, from hitting bottom hard enough that you have no choice but to rebuild from the ground up. Where are we supposed to go? His voice was small now, almost childlike. That's for you to figure out. You're an adult, David. You're capable. You've just gotten so used to someone else solving your problems that you've forgotten how to solve them yourself. But you can do this. You have to do this. He stood, walked to my window, stared out at the street below. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. Rachel says you're being cruel, that you're punishing us, that you're enjoying our suffering. What do you say? Long silence. The house creaked around us. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, life continuing in its ordinary way while we sat with these extraordinary questions. I say, he paused, gathered himself. I say I should have noticed sooner what we were doing to you, how we were treating you. I say I'm ashamed it took this to wake me up. That's honest. That's growth. I talked to Mark. You remember Mark from college? He's got a basement apartment he might rent to us. It's small, and it's expensive, and Rachel's horrified by it. But it's something. We're looking at other options too. That's good. That's exactly what you should be doing. He turned back to face me. Will you really not see us after we leave? Rachel says you're cutting us off forever. My throat tightened. This was the fear I'd been pushing down, the question I'd been avoiding. What would my life look like without David in it? Could I survive that kind of loneliness? I didn't say that, I answered carefully. Rachel said that, trying to force me into backing down through emotional blackmail. And you'll need to make your own choices about how you respond to that. But David, if you want a relationship with me going forward, it needs to be different. It needs to be based on mutual respect, not on need or obligation or habit. I can do that, he said quickly. I want to do that, then we'll see, one step at a time. After he left, I sat for a long time in my chair, looking at the space where he'd been. The conversation had gone better than I'd feared. He was starting to understand. That was something. Maybe not enough, but something. The next morning, while David and Rachel were out presumably apartment hunting, I had the locks rekeyed. A locksmith came, a cheerful man named Roberto who'd done work on the house before, and changed every exterior door. New keys, new tumblers, new beginning. You want me to make copies? He asked when he'd finished. I hesitated, then nodded. One extra set, please. When he left, I sat at my kitchen table with the spare keys in front of me. After a moment, I found an envelope and a piece of stationery. I wrote in my careful nurse's handwriting, David, use this only for genuine emergencies. Otherwise, please call before coming over. Love, Mom. I sealed the envelope and left it on the counter where he'd find it. This was what boundaries looked like, not walls to keep people out entirely, but gates that required permission to open. I changed the Wi-Fi password next. Something I should have done months ago but hadn't because it seemed petty. Because Rachel had accused me of being controlling when I'd suggested it once. But this was my internet. Paid for with my money, in my house. I chose a new password that made me smile. Work brings dignity. Let them wonder about that. Then I called the cable company. The premium package Rachel loved, HBO, Showtime, sports channels I never watched, got downgraded to basic. The customer service representative tried to talk me out of it, but I held firm. No more subsidizing other people's entertainment. Each small reclamation felt like reclaiming inches of my life, breathing room carved out of the suffocating weight of other people's needs and demands. I walked through the house afterward, noting how it already felt different, lighter, more mine. That afternoon, Rachel came home to discover the internet wasn't working. I heard her frustrated sigh from my room, heard her calling to David. "The Wi-Fi is down again. Your mother probably didn't pay the bill." I emerged from my bedroom. "The Wi-Fi is working fine. I changed the password." She whirled to face me. "You what?" "I changed the password to my internet. In my house. That's petty. That's vindictive. That's establishing boundaries," I corrected. "I need the internet for work. Then you can use your phone's data, or go to a coffee shop, or set up your own service at whatever place you end up moving to." Her face went from pale to red to purple. "You're really doing this? You're really going to be this person?" "What person is that?" "A bitter old woman who's willing to destroy her family over nothing." The words were designed to cut, to find the soft, vulnerable places where doubt lived. A year ago, even a month ago, they might have worked. But I'd grown armor in the past weeks, layer by layer, truth by truth. "I'm being a woman who refuses to be taken advantage of anymore," I said calmly. "If that makes me bitter in your eyes, I can live with that." David appeared, looking between us with mounting panic. "What's going on?" "Your mother changed the Wi-Fi password," Rachel spat. "She's cutting us off from everything. Next, she'll probably shut off the water and electricity." "I won't," I said, looking at David. "But I have canceled the premium cable package, and the additional credit card in your name, David, that's been closed too. As of this morning." I watched him process this, watched his face cycle through emotions, shock, embarrassment, anger, resignation. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "When?" he finally asked. "This morning. While you were out. You could have told us." "Why? So you could try to talk me out of it? So Rachel could throw another tantrum? I'm done negotiating about what's mine to control." The silence that followed was profound. I could see them both recalibrating, trying to figure out how to respond, what leverage they still had. But they were learning what I'd already discovered. When you own the house, when you've been supporting grown adults who should be supporting themselves, when you decide enough is enough, you hold all the cards. The power. "You could have told us." "Why? So you could try to talk me out of it? So Rachel could throw another tantrum? I'm done negotiating about what's mine to control." The silence that followed was profound. I could see them both recalibrating, trying to figure out how to respond, what leverage they still had. But they were learning what I'd already discovered. When you own the house, when you've been supporting grown adults who should be supporting themselves, when you decide enough is enough, you hold all the cards. The power had always been mine. I'd just been too afraid to use it. "This is abuse," Rachel said finally, voice shaking with rage. "Financial abuse of an elderly person. I could report you." I almost laughed. "Report me for refusing to pay for your internet and cable? For closing a credit card in my son's name that I was paying the bills on? By all means, make those calls. See how far you get." She looked to David for support, but he just stood there, deflated. Maybe he was finally seeing it, seeing how much I'd been carrying, how reasonable my requests actually were, how his wife's outrage was manufactured and hollow. "Fine," Rachel hissed. "We'll go, we'll leave, and you can have your precious house all to yourself. But don't expect us to come back. Don't expect to be part of our lives. You're choosing your pride over your family." "No," I said steadily. "I'm choosing my dignity over being used. Those aren't the same thing, Rachel, though I know you'll never see the difference." She stormed to their bedroom, slam echoing through the house. David lingered, looking lost. "Mom, Not today, son," I interrupted gently. "Not right now. Go talk to your wife, figure out your next steps, but know this, the notice stands. 30 days, that hasn't changed." He nodded slowly and followed Rachel, leaving me standing in the hallway of my own house, finally, holding my ground. That night was tense and silent. No television sounds, no laughter, no normal household noises, just thick, uncomfortable quiet punctuated by muffled arguments and Rachel's occasional crying. I stayed in my room, reading and writing, letting them sit with their reality. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it." I stared at those words for a long time before responding. "I know. We'll get through this." Would we? I honestly didn't know, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't making that my primary concern. My priority now was my own peace, my own recovery, my own life. David would have to figure out his own path forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what both of us needed. The first morning alone, I woke at 5:32, exactly when my body had trained itself to wake during 40 years of hospital shifts. For a moment, in that space between sleep and consciousness, I forgot. Forgot the eviction notice, forgot the moving truck, forgot everything. Then reality settled in, and I lay there wondering if I'd feel loneliness crash over me like a wave. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something unexpected, curiosity. What would I do with this day that was entirely mine? What did I want for breakfast? What sounds would I hear without other people's lives layered over my own? I got up slowly, my hip protesting as always, and walked barefoot through the house. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. No dishes piled in the sink overnight. No wet towels on the bathroom floor, no television left on, draining electricity, just stillness and order. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way I liked it, strong enough to strip paint, my late husband used to joke, and stood at the window watching dawn paint the sky. The ocean was gray-green in the early light, calm after yesterday's wind. A jogger passed on the street below. A neighbor's cat stalked something in the bushes. Ordinary magic, the kind I'd stopped noticing when I was too busy navigating other people's moods and needs. I spent the first week in a strange state of suspension, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for David to call and say it was a mistake, they were coming back. Waiting for Rachel to show up with some new manipulation. Waiting for my own resolve to crumble and send me calling them, begging them to return. None of it happened. David texted on day 3, settled in the apartment. It's small but okay. Talk soon? I responded. Good. Yes, call when you're ready. He didn't call. I told myself he needed time, needed space to figure things out without Rachel's voice in his ear. I told myself a lot of things to quiet the mother worry that never fully goes away, no matter how old your child gets. On day 5, I hired a cleaning service. Not because the house was dirty, I'd always kept it clean, but because I wanted it deep cleaned, wanted every trace of the last 3 years scrubbed away. They came like a small army, 3 women with equipment and supplies and cheerful efficiency. They washed windows, scrubbed grout, polished fixtures, moved furniture to vacuum beneath it. When they left, the house smelled like lemon and lavender. Sunlight seemed to reach further into rooms. I walked through it like a stranger seeing it for the first time, marveling at what had been there all along. On day 8, I called my friend Judith from the hospital. We'd worked together for 20 years, had shared countless shifts and crises and dark humor that only people in emergency medicine understand. But we'd drifted apart after I retired, especially after David and Rachel moved in, and I'd stopped accepting invitations because it was easier than dealing with Rachel's passive-aggressive comments about me abandoning them. Margaret, Judith sounded surprised and delighted. Oh my God, I was just thinking about you. How are you? I'm good, I said, and realized I meant it. Actually, I'm really good. Do you have time for coffee this week? We met at a cafe downtown, one with outdoor seating overlooking the marina. Judith arrived in a burst of energy. She'd always been like that, vibrant and quick-moving even now in her early 70s. She hugged me hard. You look different, she said, studying me. Lighter somehow. I told her everything. About David and Rachel, about the eviction, about reclaiming my house and my life. She listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes taking it all in. When I finished, she sat back and smiled. About damn time, you knew? Margaret, everyone who knew you could see it, you were disappearing. We tried to say something a few times, but you'd change the subject or make excuses for them. I didn't want to admit I'd made a mistake, that I'd let it go on so long. We rarely do. She reached across and squeezed my hand. But you did the hard thing. You stood up. That takes guts, especially with family. We talked for 3 hours. About work, about retirement, about children and disappointment, and the weird relief of getting older and caring less what people think. Judith invited me to a book club she joined. Bunch of retired medical professionals, we meet monthly, drink too much wine, barely discuss the book. And I said yes without hesitation. That yes felt monumental. Like reclaiming something I'd given away, the right to my own social life, my own interests, my own time. The second week I started reclaiming physical space. The spare bedroom that had become David and Rachel's domain got transformed. I hired a handyman to patch the holes in the walls where Rachel had hung things without asking. I painted it a soft blue-gray that reminded me of morning fog. I brought in a desk, a comfortable chair, shelves for books. I set up my laptop and the digital picture frame my sister had given me years ago, that I'd never used because Rachel said it was tacky. It became my office, my creative space, my sanctuary within a sanctuary. I started writing. Nothing fancy, just thoughts, memories, observations, things I'd been carrying around in my head for years with nowhere to put them. I wrote about nursing, about the patients I'd helped and the ones I couldn't save. I wrote about my husband, about grief and adaptation. I wrote about David as a child, the sweet boy he'd been before life and marriage and his own weaknesses had reshaped him. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. Pages and pages, filling up the computer's memory, filling up something inside me that had been empty. On week 3, my sister called. Patricia lived in Arizona, and we'd always been close despite the distance. I'd been dreading this conversation. She'd always liked David, had fond aunt memories of him, but it couldn't be avoided forever. "So I heard," she said. "David called me." My stomach dropped. "What did he tell you? That you evicted him and Rachel, that you'd been acting strange, that he was worried about you?" A pause. "But Margaret, I've been worried about you for 3 years, ever since they moved in, and you stopped sounding like yourself on the phone." Relief flooded through me. "You're not angry? Angry? I'm proud of you. I should have said something sooner, should have pushed back when I saw what was happening, but it's hard to tell someone their kid is taking advantage of them." "It's hard to hear it too." "I know," Patricia's voice gentled. "How are you really doing?" I looked around my peaceful living room, at the space that was mine again. "I'm finding out," I said honestly. "I'm discovering who I am when I'm not busy trying to keep everyone else comfortable. And I think I like her." Patricia laughed. "Good. Listen, I'm coming to visit next month, just warning you now. I want to see this reclaimed kingdom of yours. I'd love that." After we hung up, I sat with the warmth of her support. Not everyone in my life had understood my decision, but the people who mattered, the ones who really knew me, they got it. That was enough. Week 4 brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down knocked on my door one morning. She was 86, sharp as a tack, and had been widowed twice. She carried a covered dish. "Margaret," she said without preamble, "I made too much soup. You like soup?" I did. We ended up sitting at my kitchen table, eating her remarkable chicken and ginger soup, talking about nothing and everything. She'd known about David and Rachel. The whole street knew, dear, walls have eyes, and she approved of my actions. "You know what your problem was?" she said, pointing a spoon at me. "You forgot that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. There's a difference. I'm learning that. Good, learn it well. You worked your whole life. This is supposed to be your time." She stood, gathered her dish. "Next week, you come to my house. I teach you mahjong. You need more friends, more activities. Life is too short to waste on people who don't appreciate you." She left, and I found myself smiling. Mrs. Chen was right. I'd spent 3 years in a holding pattern, waiting for David and Rachel to get their act together, afraid to make plans because what if they needed me? Now I could make plans. Now I could say yes to things. Now I could build a life that was rich and full on its own terms. I started saying yes to everything. Book club with Judith, mahjong with Mrs. Chen, a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try, volunteering at the hospital gift shop 2 mornings a week, which got me back into the building where I'd spent so much of my life, connecting with old colleagues. Each new activity, each new connection, felt like adding another brick to a foundation I was building, a structure to support the next phase of my life. David finally called on week 5. I was in the middle of a watercolor exercise, trying to capture the way light hit the ocean at sunset and failing spectacularly, when my phone rang. "Mom?" His voice was uncertain. "David, how are you?" "I'm okay. The apartment is working out. I got more hours at work, so that's good." A pause. "I wanted to apologize, again, and properly, for everything." "I appreciate that. Rachel and I have been talking. Well, we've been fighting mostly. But also talking. About our patterns, about how we treated you. She doesn't see it the same way I do, but I'm starting to understand what you meant. About respect and taking responsibility. That's growth. I want to see you, if you're willing. Maybe coffee? Just us?" I looked at my terrible watercolor. at the afternoon light in my studio office, at the life I'd been building brick by careful brick. "I'd like that," I said. "But David, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 2 months ago. I'm not going to go back to how things were." "I know. I don't want you to. I want—" He trailed off, searching for words. "I want to know this version of you, the one who stands up for herself." "Then let's have coffee. Next week?" We made plans. When I hung up, I felt neither relief nor dread, just a calm acceptance. Whatever relationship David and I rebuilt, it would be different. Maybe smaller, maybe more distant, but maybe more honest. That evening, I stood on my small back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the ocean. The sky went orange and pink and purple, putting on a show like it did every evening, indifferent to human drama. The waves rolled in with their eternal rhythm. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 months ago, diminished, resentful, trapped in a situation of her own making. Then I thought about who I was becoming, someone who took up space unapologetically, who prioritized her own peace, who understood that love didn't mean sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. The journey wasn't over. There were still awkward moments, still twinges of guilt, still nights when I wondered if I'd been too harsh. But those moments were getting fewer, smaller, easier to breathe through. Mrs. Chen was right. Being kind didn't mean being a doormat. It meant treating others with respect while also respecting yourself. It meant understanding that healthy relationships required boundaries, reciprocity, mutual consideration. I'd spent my career in emergency medicine learning to make hard calls, to prioritize, to know when intervention helped and when it harmed. Somehow I'd forgotten to apply those skills to my own life. But I was remembering now. Better late than never, as my mother used to say. The next morning, I woke early again and lay in bed listening to the house. It wasn't silent, old houses never are. It creaked and settled, whispered and sighed, but the sounds were peaceful, familiar mine. I got up and made my brutal coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with the morning paper, an old-fashioned habit I'd returned to, and planned my day. Watercolor class in the afternoon, grocery shopping for one, buying exactly what I wanted. Maybe a walk on the beach if my hip cooperated. Maybe working on the essay I'd started about what I'd learned from 40 years of watching people at their most vulnerable. Small things, ordinary things. But strung together, they made a life. My life. Not perfect, not without complications or difficult moments, but mine. Chosen, intentional, reclaimed. I thought about the woman who'd called her lawyer at 1:30 in the morning, desperate and determined. I felt grateful to her, to past me, for having the courage to start this process. For understanding that it was never too late to stand up, to reclaim what was rightfully yours, to remember who you were before you'd made yourself small. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find a delivery person with a large box. "Margaret Foster?" "That's me," he had me sign, handed over the box, left with a cheerful wave. I carried it inside, curious. I hadn't ordered anything. Inside was an enormous orchid plant, white blooms, elegant and perfect, and a card. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on teaching me what I needed to learn. I love you. David." I stood holding the card, feeling tears prick my eyes. Not sad tears. Not happy tears exactly, something more complex, grief and hope tangled together, the end of something and the beginning of something else. I placed the orchid on the table where the water pitcher used to sit, the one Rachel wouldn't pass me, the one that had started everything. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Where once there had been contempt and refusal, now there were flowers and acknowledgement. Things weren't fixed. Rachel was still angry, still feeding David her version of events. The damage done to our relationship would take years to repair, if it ever fully did. But this small gesture of understanding, was a start. More importantly, I didn't need it to be more than that. My peace wasn't dependent on David's growth or Rachel's approval. It was built on my own foundation now, solid and mine. I spent the rest of that morning rearranging my living room. The marks on the floor where their furniture had been were barely visible now, almost healed. I moved my chair to catch better light. I hung artwork I'd been storing in the closet. I put out photos of people I loved, moments I treasured, my late husband, Patricia, old nursing colleagues, the life I'd lived before I'd tried to live everyone else's. By noon, the room looked nothing like it had 2 months ago. It looked alive, personal, intentionally chosen. It looked like me. I stood in the center of it and turned slowly, taking it all in. My house, my space, my choices reflected in every corner. Outside, the world continued its turning. People went about their lives, fighting their own battles, making their own mistakes and corrections. The ocean kept its rhythm. The sun traced its arc across the sky. And inside my small, reclaimed kingdom, I breathed deeply and smiled. This was what freedom felt like. This was what dignity felt like. This was what it felt like to be Margaret Foster, not someone's mother or someone's burden or someone's convenience. Just Margaret, complete and whole and enough. I made lunch, a proper lunch, with fresh ingredients and care, and ate it slowly at my kitchen table. I washed the dishes by hand, enjoying the simple meditation of warm water and soap. I wiped down the counters until they gleamed. Then I sat at my desk in my blue-gray office and wrote. I wrote about transformation and courage. I wrote about the quiet strength it takes to say no, to establish boundaries, to choose yourself when the world tells you that's selfish. I wrote about learning that self-preservation isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. The words flowed like they had purpose, like they might matter to someone else someday. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. Either way, they mattered to me. They were proof that I was still here, still growing, still capable of learning new things even at 74. Evening came softly. I made simple dinner, poured a glass of wine, and carried both out to my back porch. The sunset show was beginning again, tonight's version in shades of coral and gold. I raised my glass to the horizon, to the endless ocean, to possibility. Here's to second chances, I said softly. Here's to remembering who you are. Here's to standing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The waves answered with their eternal applause, and Margaret Foster, nurse, mother, homeowner, woman reclaimed, smiled and drank deep. The coffee shop David chose was neutral territory, not near my house, not near his apartment, somewhere in between. A local place called the Harbor Bean, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I arrived 10 minutes early, my old habit from years of hospital shifts when being late could mean the difference between life and death. I ordered a cappuccino and claimed a corner table where I could see the door. My hands were steadier than I'd expected. 3 months ago, the prospect of this meeting would have sent my anxiety through the roof, worry about saying the wrong thing, about pushing too hard or not hard enough, about damaging our relationship further. But I'd learned something in the past weeks. I could survive disappointing my son. I had survived it, and the world hadn't ended. David arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. Punctuality had never been his strength. He looked different, thinner, more tired, but also more alert somehow, like someone who'd been sleepwalking and finally woken up. Mom, he leaned down and kissed my cheek, the gesture both familiar and strange. Thanks for meeting me. Of course. He ordered coffee, came back, settled across from me. For a moment we just sat there, two people who'd known each other his entire life suddenly unsure how to begin. The orchid was beautiful, I said finally. Thank you. I remembered you used to love orchids. Before, he stopped, seemed to reconsider. You had them all over the house when Dad was alive. I did. I'd forgotten that. So had I. He stirred his coffee unnecessarily. I've been thinking a lot about what I forgot, what I stopped noticing. I waited, letting him find his words. When Rachel and I first moved in, I told myself it was temporary. Just until I got my business off the ground, just until we saved enough for a place. But months passed, then years, and it was just easier to stay, easier to let you handle things, easier to ignore how Rachel talked to you because confronting her meant confronting everything else. Everything else. My failure. The word came out flat. I failed at the business, failed at providing for my wife the way I thought I should, failed at being the son you raised me to be. And instead of dealing with that, I just sank into your house like it was quicksand. Let it swallow me up. I reached across and touched his hand. David, struggling doesn't make you a failure, no, but giving up does. And I gave up. On myself, on you, on basic decency. He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. The water thing? Mom, I heard her. I heard how she spoke to you, and I just sat there. I was ashamed then and I'm ashamed now. There's no excuse for that. No, I agreed, there isn't. He flinched slightly but held my gaze. You were right to kick us out. I see that now. If you hadn't, I'd still be there, still sinking, still telling myself tomorrow I'd change. How are things now? Really? He let out a long breath, hard. The apartment is tiny and expensive. Rachel is furious. At you, at me, at the situation. We're in counseling, believe it or not. She threatened to leave if I didn't agree to go, and I called her bluff. Told her that maybe we needed to figure out if this marriage could actually work. That took courage. It took desperation. He smiled wryly. But yeah, maybe some courage too. The therapist is helping me see patterns, not just with you but with everything. How I avoid conflict, how I let people make decisions for me. How I've been drifting through life instead of steering. What does Rachel think about all this? His expression darkened. She thinks you manipulated me, that you're playing the victim, to turn me against her. The therapist keeps trying to get her to look at her own behavior, but... He shrugged. I don't know if she can, or will. That must be difficult. It is. But Mom, I'm starting to realize something. I married Rachel partly because she was decisive, strong-willed. After years of you being strong for both of us after Dad died, I thought I wanted someone who'd take charge. He paused. But there's a difference between being strong and being domineering, and I enabled the domineering part because it meant I didn't have to make hard choices. I absorbed this, impressed by his insight. What happens now? With you and Rachel? I don't know. We're taking it week by week. Some days I think we'll make it. Other days. He trailed off. But I know this. I can't go back to how things were. Not with her, not with you, not with my life. I have to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the counseling, about fights and breakthroughs, about the struggle to pay bills, and the strange relief of standing on his own feet even when it hurt. I told him about my watercolor class, about the book club, about Mrs. Chen and Mahjong, about rebuilding a life I'd let atrophy while I was busy being useful to people who didn't appreciate it. When we stood to leave, he hugged me properly. Can we do this again? Regular coffee dates? I'd like that. And Mom? I know I don't get to ask for much right now, but don't give up on me completely. I know I have a lot to prove. David, I never gave up on you. I gave up on being taken advantage of. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. I'm learning about differences. About boundaries and respect and reciprocity. Better late than never, right? Right. I watched him walk to his car, this middle-aged man who was still my little boy in some chamber of my heart. But I didn't feel the old pull to fix things for him, to make his path easier. He needed this struggle, he needed to find his own strength, and I needed to let him. The following weeks settled into a rhythm, coffee with David every other Thursday, his idea, and I appreciated the consistency. He never asked to come to the house, which I also appreciated. That space was still mine, still healing. Watercolor class became my favorite part of the week. I was terrible at it. My seascapes looked like muddy puddles, my florals like explosions, but the teacher, a woman named Rosa with silver dreadlocks and an infectious laugh, insisted there was no such thing as bad art, only art that hadn't found its purpose yet. You're too controlling, she told me one afternoon, watching me struggle with a painting of pelicans. You want to dictate exactly where the water goes, exactly how the colors blend. But watercolor doesn't work that way. You have to learn to let go, to guide but not dominate, to work with the medium, not against it. I stared at her. Are we still talking about painting? She grinned. Honey, we're always talking about more than painting. Book club was equally revelatory. Turns out we really did barely discuss the book. Last month's selection sat unread by at least half the group, but the conversations that happened instead were rich and real. 8 women, all retired from medical professions, all navigating this strange phase of life where you're no longer defined by your work, but not quite sure what defines you instead. I spent 40 years as a surgeon, said Anne, a sharp-featured woman who'd retired from orthopedics. I knew exactly who I was, Dr. Ann Yates, trauma specialist, the one they called when everything was going to hell. Now I'm just Anne. And some days I don't know what that means. It means you get to find out, Judith said. That's the gift of this phase. We spent decades being what other people needed. Now we get to be what we want. But what if you don't know what you want? Someone else asked. Then you experiment, I heard myself say. You try things. You say yes to invitations. You make terrible watercolors and laugh at yourself. You reclaim your space and your life, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They all turned to look at me. I'd told them my story weeks ago, but I think this was the first time they saw how much it had changed me. Look at Margaret, Judith said softly. 3 months ago she was disappearing. Now look at her. I felt my face flush, but I didn't duck away from it. I'm still figuring it out, but at least I'm figuring it out on my own terms now. At home, I continued my small revolutions. I joined a gym, something I'd never done before because Rachel said gyms were meat markets for old people, and discovered I loved the pool. Swimming laps took me back to childhood summers, to the freedom of moving through water. My hip thanked me for the low-impact exercise. I started cooking again, really cooking. Not the bland, Rachel-approved meals I'd been making, but the foods I actually enjoyed. Spicy curries that made my eyes water, rich pasta sauces with too much garlic. My mother's pot roast recipe that took all day and made the house smell like comfort. I ate dinner at my kitchen table with the good china. Why save it for special occasions when every day you wake up breathing is a special occasion? And I savored every bite without apology. Patricia visited as promised, staying for a long weekend. She walked through my house with an expression of wonder. It's like you again, she kept saying. It feels like you. We spent 3 days doing sister things we hadn't done in years. We drove up the coast to the art galleries in Cambria. We drank wine on my porch and talked until midnight. We laughed until we cried about childhood memories and family absurdities. On her last evening, we were sitting outside watching the stars emerge when she said, "You know what I admire most about what you did?" "What?" "You didn't wait for permission. You didn't wait for David to see the light or Rachel to change or anyone to validate your feelings. You just decided enough was enough and acted. That's power. Real power." It didn't feel powerful. It felt terrifying. The best things usually do. After she left, I missed her. But it was a clean missing. Not the desperate loneliness I'd feared during those years with David and Rachel, when I'd clung to their presence even as it poisoned me. This was just the normal ache of distance between people who love each other but have their own lives. 4 months after the eviction, David called with news. "Rachel and I separated," he said without preamble. "She moved out last week." My heart jumped. "David, I'm sorry. Don't be. It was necessary. We kept trying in therapy, but every session just made it clearer that we want different things. She wants someone who'll give her what she wants without question. I want someone who treats me like a partner, not a project." "How are you doing?" "Honestly? Relieved. Scared, but relieved. The apartment feels bigger with just me in it. Quieter." He paused. "I asked her about how she treated you, in therapy with the counselor there. Really asked her to examine it." "What did she say?" "She said you were too sensitive, that you took everything personally, that you should have been grateful to have us there." I felt the old anger flare then settle. "And what did you say?" "I said she was wrong, that you were a person deserving of respect in your own home, and we'd failed to give you that. That her treatment of you was inexcusable, and my silence was just as bad." "How did she respond?" "She didn't really, just said I was brainwashed." That's when I knew it was over. When someone can't even acknowledge basic decency, there's no foundation to build on. We talked for a while longer. He was making plans, looking for a cheaper apartment, picking up more work, thinking about going back to school for a teaching certificate. "Something stable," he said. "Something where I can contribute, not just drift." "I'm proud of you," I told him, and meant it. "Thanks, Mom. I know I put you through hell. I know sorry doesn't cover it. But I'm trying to be better, to do better. That's all any of us can do." After we hung up, I sat with the news. Part of me was sad. Despite everything, I'd never wanted David's marriage to fail. But another part recognized that sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly. That weekend, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called David and invited him to dinner. At my house, the first time since the eviction. He arrived with flowers, pink roses, my favorite, and visible nerves. "Is it weird that I'm nervous?" "A little weird, but I get it. Come in." He stepped through the doorway carefully, looking around like a stranger. "Wow, it looks so different." It looks like me. Yeah. He smiled. It really does. We had dinner at the kitchen table, my pot roast, his childhood favorite. We talked about safe things at first, his work, my watercolor class, Patricia's visit. But gradually the conversation deepened. I never apologized for the water thing specifically, he said, for sitting there while Rachel called you useless. Mom, that moment haunts me. I see it in my head sometimes and I just... His voice cracked. I'm so ashamed. I know. How do you forgive something like that? I thought carefully before answering. I don't forgive the action. What happened was unforgivable. But I'm choosing to forgive you, the person, because I see you trying to change. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means deciding not to let the past poison the future. Do you think we can rebuild our relationship? I think we're doing it now, slowly, carefully. But David, it can't ever go back to how it was before. I won't make myself small again. I won't prioritize your comfort over my dignity. I don't want you to. I want... He stopped, gathered himself. I want a mother who's whole and happy and living her life. Even if that means seeing less of me. Even if that means you can't always be available when I need you. That's very mature. It's something my therapist helped me understand. That healthy love doesn't consume or diminish, it enhances. And what we had before wasn't healthy for either of us. After dinner, we sat on the back porch with coffee. The ocean was restless tonight, waves crashing with extra force. Storm coming probably. Can I ask you something? David said. Of course. Do you ever regret it, kicking us out? Does it keep you up at night? I considered the question honestly. Sometimes I lie awake wondering if I could have handled it differently. If there was a gentler way. But do I regret reclaiming my life? No. Never. Even on the hard days, even when I'm lonely, I don't regret it. Are you lonely? Really? Sometimes. But it's a clean loneliness, not the poisonous kind I felt when I was surrounded by people who didn't value me. This loneliness is just space. And space can be filled with good things, chosen things, instead of whatever seeps in when you're too afraid to have boundaries. He nodded slowly, processing. I'm going to remember that. Space can be filled with chosen things. Your therapist would be proud of that insight. He laughed, genuine and warm. She probably would. When he left that evening, the hug he gave me felt different, equal, adult to adult, person to person, not desperate child to rescuing mother. It felt like progress. The seasons turned. Autumn brought cooler air, marine layers that hung over the coast like blankets. My routines deepened and expanded. Swimming 3 times a week, book club monthly, coffee with David every other Thursday, sometimes more if he needed to talk through something difficult. Mahjong with Mrs. Chen, who'd taken me under her wing like a long-lost granddaughter. I started volunteering more at the hospital, not just at the gift shop, but mentoring young nurses. Sharing the wisdom 40 years had taught me. They'd gather during their breaks, these exhausted 20-somethings, and I'd tell them about burnout prevention, about setting boundaries with patients and families, about remembering they were humans first and healers second. You can't pour from an empty cup, I'd tell them, and watch them frantically scribbling it down like it was revolutionary wisdom. Maybe to them it was. Maybe they'd learn it earlier than I had. One evening, 6 months after the eviction, I was reviewing my finances, another new habit, staying on top of things instead of letting them drift, and realized something startling. My savings had stabilized and even grown. Without David and Rachel's expenses, without constantly covering their choices, my retirement fund was actually healthy. I could travel if I wanted. I could take that European river cruise Patricia kept sending me brochures about. I could renovate the bathroom with the fancy tile I'd always admired. I could donate to causes I cared about. I could choose. The possibilities spread out before me like that endless ocean, full of potential and mystery and invitation. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Night had fallen, the street quiet except for distant waves. My reflection looked back at me from the darkened glass, a 74-year-old woman, silver-haired and lined with living, but standing straight. Standing strong. Margaret Foster, nurse, mother, survivor. Woman reclaimed. I raised my coffee cup to my reflection. Here's to you, I whispered. Here's to standing up. Here's to remembering, here's to never forgetting again. My reflection smiled back, and in her eyes, my eyes, I saw something I'd been missing for years. I saw myself, and I was enough. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in early spring, 9 months after I'd changed the locks and reclaimed my life. I was in my studio office, working on an essay about boundaries in caregiving relationships, something a nursing journal had expressed interest in publishing, when my phone buzzed with David's name. "Mom, do you have a minute?" His voice sounded different, lighter somehow, cautiously hopeful. "Of course, what's going on? I got the teaching position, the full-time one I interviewed for last month. High school history, benefits, summers off, the whole package." Joy bloomed in my chest. "David, that's wonderful, congratulations." "Thanks, I start in the fall, which gives me time to get certified in a couple areas they need." "Mom, this is..." His voice caught. "This is the first time in years I felt like I'm moving forward instead of just treading water. You've worked hard for this." "I have. And I wanted to tell you first, before anyone else, because none of this would have happened if you hadn't kicked me out." The statement hung there, stark and true. "You did the work, David. I just created the circumstance that made the work necessary. You saved my life," he said quietly. "I know that now. I was drowning, and I was taking you down with me. You had the strength to let go, even though it hurt. Especially because it hurt." After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen without seeing it. 9 months ago, I'd been terrified that evicting my son would permanently destroy our relationship. That he'd never forgive me. That I'd die alone and estranged, my final years marked by regret. Instead, I was watching him become the man I'd always hoped he could be. Not despite my actions, but because of them. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable. Sometimes saving someone means letting them struggle. Sometimes the greatest gift is the hardest boundary. That afternoon, I met Judith and Anne for lunch at a seafood place on the wharf. The marine layer had burned off, leaving one of those crystalline spring days when the ocean sparkles like it's full of diamonds, and the air tastes clean and salt-sweet. "You're glowing," Anne observed, studying me with a surgeon's eye. "What happened?" I told them about David's job, about his progress, about how different our relationship had become. "It's smaller," I admitted. "We see each other maybe twice a month, but it's real now, honest, based on choice rather than need. That's the goal, isn't it?" Judith said. "Relationships that exist because people want them, not because they're trapped in them." When my daughter cut me off for setting boundaries around her addiction, Anne said slowly, "I thought I'd never survive it. Thought I'd die from the grief. But you know what? I did survive. And after 3 years of silence, she got sober and called me. And the relationship we've built since is stronger than what we had before because it's based on reality, not fantasy." "How long did it take to stop feeling guilty?" I asked. "About 2 years, maybe more. The guilt creeps back sometimes, even now. But I've learned to recognize it for what it is. My old programming, the one that says mothers should sacrifice everything, that our pain doesn't matter as much as our children's comfort." She paused. "It's bullshit, by the way, that programming, complete bullshit." We laughed, and other diners glanced over at 3 older women cackling like conspirators. Let them look. We'd earned our laughter. Later that week, Mrs. Chen invited me to her 87th birthday celebration, a small gathering of neighbors and friends in her immaculate garden. I brought flowers and a card with a hand-painted crane inside, my watercolor skills finally improving enough to create something recognizable. "Margaret." She embraced me, strong despite her small frame. "I want you to meet someone. Helen, come here." A woman around my age approached, elegant in flowing linen, silver jewelry catching the light. "Helen just moved into the neighborhood," Mrs. Chen said. "Helen, this is Margaret. You two should talk. You have similar stories." We did talk, standing by Mrs. Chen's camellia bushes with glasses of champagne. Helen had spent 5 years caring for her mother with dementia, sacrificing her own health and finances, until her siblings finally intervened and forced her into respite care. "I was furious at them," she said. "Furious. How dare they tell me I couldn't care for my own mother? But they were right. I was killing myself, and Mom was no better for it." Sometimes caregiving becomes its own kind of addiction, the feeling that you're needed, that you're noble, that you're doing what love requires. It took therapy to recognize that martyrdom isn't love. What is it then? Fear, usually. Fear of being seen as selfish, fear of being unneeded, fear of having to figure out who you are when you're not defined by service to someone else. Her words resonated deep. That was exactly what I'd been doing with David and Rachel, defining myself through usefulness, through sacrifice, through the role of endlessly giving mother. When that was stripped away, I'd had to discover who Margaret Foster actually was beneath all those layers of service. "So who are you now?" I asked her. She smiled. "I'm still figuring it out, but I paint, I garden, I travel. I see my mother twice a week in her facility, and our visits are actually pleasant now because I'm not exhausted and resentful. I'm not the martyr anymore. I'm just Helen, visiting her mom." Just Helen sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Just Margaret doesn't sound bad either. We exchanged numbers, made plans for coffee. Another thread in the web I was weaving, this new life made of chosen connections rather than obligatory ones. As spring deepened into summer, my life continued its gentle expansion. The Nursing Journal published my essay, which led to an invitation to speak at a conference about caregiver burnout. Standing at that podium, looking out at 200 exhausted nurses and social workers and home health aides, I spoke from hard-won experience. Boundaries aren't cruelty, I told them. Boundaries are architecture. They're the walls that let you build something sustainable instead of something that collapses under its own weight. And yes, people will call you selfish when you set them. People will say you're cold, harsh, unloving. Let them. You know what's actually unloving? Giving so much that you destroy yourself and ultimately fail the people you're trying to help. The applause was thunderous. Afterwards, dozens of people approached me with stories, questions, tears. One young man, maybe 30, grabbed my hands and said, "Thank you. I've been caring for my partner with MS, and I'm drowning. Everyone says I'm a hero, but I feel like a prisoner. You just gave me permission to be human." I hugged him hard. "Be human," I whispered. "Heroes die. Humans endure." David started coming to dinner once a month, a tradition we'd settled into. He'd arrive with wine or flowers, and we'd cook together. Him chopping vegetables while I seasoned meat, moving around each other in the kitchen like a choreographed dance we were learning step by step. During one of these dinners, about 10 months post-eviction, he brought up Rachel. "She's dating someone new," he said, studying his wine glass. "Moved to Sacramento to be with him. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, mostly." "Guilty for feeling relieved, but relieved." He looked up at me. "Is that awful?" "It's honest. I loved her. I still do in some way. But I also see now that we weren't good for each other. She needed someone to dominate, and I needed someone to make decisions for me. It was comfortable but poisonous." "What do you need now?" He thought about it. "I need to be enough on my own first, before I can be part of a healthy relationship with someone else." That's what my therapist keeps saying, and I think she's right. She sounds very wise. She's expensive but worth it. He grinned. "Though, speaking of expensive, Mom, I want to start paying you back, for everything. I've been saving and I can manage $100 a month to start. More when the teaching salary kicks in." "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Not because you're asking, but because I need to. For myself. To prove I can take responsibility for my choices." I felt tears prick my eyes. This was growth. This was the David I'd raised, finally finding his way back to himself. "Okay," I said softly. "If it's important to you." "It is." We sealed the agreement with a hug, and something between us shifted again. Another layer of parent-child dynamic giving way to adult respect. That summer brought Patricia back for a longer visit, 2 weeks this time. We took day trips up and down the coast, visited the missions, ate too much seafood, laughed at everything and nothing. One evening, we were on my back porch with a bottle of wine between us, the sky going purple and gold. "You're different," Patricia said. "Fundamentally different from the woman I visited a year ago." "How so?" "You take up space now. You don't apologize for existing. You don't make yourself small." She refilled our glasses. "Remember when we were kids and Mom used to say good girls don't take the last cookie?" I laughed. God, yes. We'd sit there staring at that last cookie, both wanting it, neither taking it. We learned young that wanting things for ourselves was selfish, that good women give and never ask for anything back. Patricia raised her glass. "Here's to being bad women who eat the whole damn cookie if we want it." We clinked glasses and drank deep. and I thought about how many years I'd spent not taking the last cookie, not asking for what I needed, not claiming my space. How much life I'd missed while trying to be good. Do you ever resent Mom for teaching us that? I asked. Patricia considered. I used to. But she was just passing down what she'd learned. The whole history of women is learning to make ourselves smaller, quieter, more accommodating. Breaking that pattern is revolutionary work. Then I guess I'm a revolutionary. Damn right you are. As autumn arrived again, 1 full year since the eviction, I found myself taking stock. The woman I'd been 12 months ago seemed like a stranger, exhausted, resentful, disappearing into her own life. The woman I was now had calluses and scars, yes, but also strength and clarity. I'd published 3 essays, I'd spoken at 2 conferences, I'd become a regular mentor at the hospital. I'd made new friends and deepened old friendships. I'd taken a watercolor workshop in Mendocino, and finally painted a decent seascape. I'd learned to play mahjong well enough to win occasionally. I'd read 47 books, I'd swum 150 miles in the pool, I'd cooked meals that delighted only me and eaten them without apology. I'd lived. On the anniversary of the day I'd called James Whitmore at 1:30 in the morning, I took myself to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. Solo dining used to terrify me. The assumption that there was something wrong with a woman eating alone, that it signaled loneliness or failure. But I'd learned to love it, to savor the solitude and freedom of it. I ordered the prix-fixe menu, paired each course with wine the sommelier recommended, and ate slowly, mindfully, celebrating myself. When the waiter asked if I was celebrating something special, I smiled and said, yes. 1 year of choosing myself. He looked confused but brought me a complimentary dessert anyway. Walking home along the beach afterward, shoes in hand, toes in the sand, I thought about the journey, about how terrifying that first phone call had been, about watching the moving truck pull away, about the loneliness that came in waves those first weeks, the second guessing, the guilt, but also about the slow, steady reclamation of joy, the rediscovery of Margaret Foster beneath all those layers of obligation and resentment, the surprise of learning that I was still interesting, still capable, still growing at 74. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Happy anniversary, Mom. 1 year since you changed my life. Love you. I stopped walking and looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon glowing orange in the sunset. Waves rolled in with their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, continuing their work of reshaping coastlines 1 grain of sand at a time. That's what this year had been, reshaping myself 1 small decision at a time. 1 boundary set, 1 coffee date, 1 watercolor attempted, 1 essay written, 1 swim completed, 1 moment of choosing myself over someone else's comfort. I texted back, changed both our lives, proud of you, love you too. Then I added, and proud of me. It felt bold claiming pride in myself, but I'd earned it. I'd done the hard work of standing up, of reclaiming my life, of refusing to make myself small anymore. The house welcomed me home like an old friend. I walked through it slowly, turning on lights, touching familiar objects, feeling the peace that saturated every corner. This space that had felt like a battleground a year ago now felt like sanctuary. I made chamomile tea and settled into my reading chair with a new novel. Outside my window, the neighborhood settled into evening routines. Mrs. Chen's porch light came on. A couple walked past with their dog. Somewhere down the street, children laughed. Normal, beautiful, ordinary life. I thought about writing, maybe another essay, maybe the start of the memoir people kept suggesting I write. But tonight, I just wanted to sit with this feeling. This sense of wholeness. This knowledge that I'd survived the hard thing and come through it stronger. The phone rang. I answered to hear Helen's warm voice. Margaret, a few of us are meeting tomorrow for a beach walk and coffee. Want to join? A year ago, I would have hesitated, would have checked if David needed anything first, would have found some reason to say no. Now the yes came easily. I'd love to. What time? We made plans, and after hanging up, I smiled at how simple it was, how uncomplicated life became when you were honest about what you wanted and needed. When you stopped twisting yourself into shapes designed to please others. I finished my tea and got ready for bed, moving through my evening routine with the deliberate care I'd learned to give myself. Face washed, teeth brushed, medications taken, tomorrow's clothes laid out. Small acts of self-care that added up to a life of dignity. In bed, I reached for my journal, another new habit, and wrote. 1 year ago tonight, I was afraid of everything, afraid of being alone, afraid of my son's anger, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of being seen as cruel or selfish, afraid I was destroying my family. Tonight, I'm afraid of nothing. Or rather, I'm afraid of the normal things, illness, loss, the passage of time, but not of choosing myself, not of setting boundaries, not of claiming my space in the world. I learned this year that love doesn't mean sacrifice to the point of self-destruction, that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable. I learned that it's never too late to remember who you are, that 74 is not too old to start over, that dignity is worth fighting for, even when the fight is with people you love. I learned that I am enough. Just Margaret, just me, enough. I closed the journal and turned off the light. In the darkness I listened to the distant ocean, that eternal rhythm that had witnessed everything, my struggles, my transformation, my rebirth into someone who no longer apologized for existing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to practice being this version of myself. But tonight, I rested in the peace of knowing I'd done the hardest part. I'd stood up, I'd reclaimed my life, I'd remembered who I was, and Margaret Foster, nurse, mother, survivor, woman reclaimed, slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who'd finally come home to herself. The house creaked and settled around me, no longer holding its breath. The ocean kept its ancient rhythm, and somewhere in the darkness, in that space between sleep and waking, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was how it was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without complications, not free from loneliness or difficulty, but honest, real, mine. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.